So sometimes I don't know how I feel going into these reviews because I feel like I have less to say than I do for some of my other series reviews. But that's because my other series reviews are like an hour long, which is extensive. And I just have to be like, it's fine if this is only like a 20-minute review. That might even still be too long. So hopefully this is not an overly long review of the Books of Babel. Oh, hello, cat. Look, she's being all cute and going upside down for you all. Oh, are you going to do a big stretch and fall off the bed? That'd be really funny if you could do that on camera. No. Alright, that's the intro. The cat's staying in. Books of Babel, everyone. Hopefully Vin stays around and can be the cameo for this entire video. Okay, so as I did for the green bone, I'm basically just making the reading experience section that I used to have for the reviews where I split up like plot, characters, action, and stuff. I'm just going to talk about everything in there because the reading experience was the best part of the review. But first, what is it about? So if you've watched many videos on the BookTube, you probably know what this is about. Although the thing that people generally say the plot is, which is basically Thomas Senlin, this dude has saved up and is going on a honeymoon with his wife to the Tower of Babel, which is this thing, which, as you can imagine, is a giant tower, the greatest architectural and achievement of civilization. But it's like Disneyland, but way worse, and that it means his wife instantly gets lost. So he's got to go in the tower. Guess what? He's got to ascend in a book called Senlin Ascends. Yeah, and that's not really what the series is about. That's what Senlin Ascends is about. And that's kind of... There's a number of main characters. Senlin Ascends, really, it's like Senlin is a protagonist the way, like, Koth is the protagonist of Kingkiller, or Fitz is the protagonist of Farseer, or Harry Dresden is the protagonist of Dresden Files / Harry Potter is the protagonist of Harry Potter. In that this really is like just Senlin's story with supporting characters. The other three books, Senlin is still the protagonist, but he's like the protagonist the way like Rand, Vin, Frodo, or Kaladin is. And the larger plot of the series is generally about various interpersonal and long-term conflicts within the tower, and arguably with the tower, because interestingly the tower is almost like an antagonist of this series, the way it like corrupts people, and is almost like a drain on the people living there. So normally what you hear, like, no, it's not 4 books of a guy looking for his wife. That would be a little much. Yeah, so it's not about that. It's really, and there tends to be, quite a bit in the other characters. Like, there are a number of POVs, and they all kind of have their subplots, their things, the same way Tom is looking for his wife, and those connect to the more primary conflicts of the book. And speaking of, like, the way that the tower, like, influences people and is almost the antagonist, in general, the characters for this book are written in a style that I almost want to say is like surreal, in that the people, not like the actual POV characters, but the people you run into don't quite feel right. And I don't mean like Josiah Bancroft can't write side characters. They don't feel realistic. I mean, he has, I think, deliberately turned the dial like just slightly off, so everyone kind of feels slightly surreal, generally based on where they live, because they don't live in a sane place. They live in a tower, in the Tower of Babel, which tends to be pretty crazy, and the people who live there tend to be crazy, and they just feel off, which to Tom, who's a somewhat normal person, he's, very naive and very, like, careful and very measured, but he's, not insane and is somewhat normal. it generally adds a feeling of tension and unease to have everyone around him being just slightly off. And not everyone is off in the same way, in that the Tower of Babel is a tower with a bunch of floors, and it's not one big society. It's not like there's someone who's like in charge of it all. Each floor is very distinct. So actually, when you open the book, it has like the first 6 floors, and it has like the basement, the parlor, the baths, New Babel, Pelphia, and the Silk Gardens. And each floor, all the floors are corrupt in some way, but they're all corrupt in their own unique way, and the way that the various floors are corrupt rubs off on the characters, and also is used as a way to, I think, explore the themes, because I think the way it explores aspects of societies and culture and environment can change people's values and how they act and what their priorities are. And I think it uses the setting and like the way it affects how the characters live to also inform the themes, which I think is very well done. So for reading, I like to say like this tends to be probably medium paced, like on the pacing scale. If 1 is like super slow, like Crossroads of Twilight, Fool's Assassin, and 10 is like pedal to the metal, like thriller, Golden Sun pacing, Changes pacing. This is pretty in the middle, where it's not like things are like plot beats are happening. It's never going to just spend like 200 pages on like just setting a world. There's always going to be some plot beat advancing, but it's also not like it's rushing, and it's going to definitely take its time to like flesh things out and not rush things super fast. And it tends to not have that much action. It's not like the lowest action series I've read. Like, it has more action than like the Live Ship Traders has, for example. It has some action, but it doesn't have a lot of action. I wish it had less action. I don't think Josiah Bancroft is good at writing action, and I think he is good at writing basically everything else. I kind of wish he just wrote action like the way Tolkien did, where Tolkien will just write like, Gimli hit some fools with his axe, Legolas fired some shots with his bow, Aragorn's sword like leaped out of its sheath and sang as it cleaved orcs, and it's just like, that's the action scene. I wish Bancroft did that, because I actually dislike his action scenes, like, pretty vehemently. He actually might be one of the worst action writers in the genre, this is really the only thing I think he's actually bad at. The rest of this review is going to be mostly positive, but he tends to write very blow by blow in a way that, I'm going to have a video on this of like characterization and action, and that I think most good action scenes in film or in books, but especially in books, are important for the story, and they tell you a story, and they usually tell you something about the characters, and that usually doesn't happen in blow by blow. There are some authors who can kind of get away with blow by blow because it feels like very intense and it feels clear and you can really picture it in your head. I could not picture these fight scenes in my head, and they were not clear and they were not intense. And normally I don't like skimming action scenes because so many authors, I think, do a really good job of telling important parts of their story in their action scenes. I don't think Bancroft does. I think you can skim his action scenes. There are like ship versus ship scenes, the action scenes, that I would not necessarily recommend skimming, but for like, if people are trying to just hit each other, it just kind of ended up being boring. And usually just knowing the result told you just as much about the story as actually seeing how the result came to be. But fortunately, there's not that much action. I hope anything in the future he writes has even less, and he just kind of goes, I'm really good at writing all this stuff. I'm not an action writer. I'm just going to not write action. Who cares? You know what? I don't think people are reading these for the action. I don't think anyone is going to be like, I'm not going to read this new series by Josiah Bancroft because the action scenes are too short. I just don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, enough of being negative. That's almost all the negative stuff I have. There's some things I'm not overwhelmingly positive on, but that's the only aspect. Like, if I ever do the Books of Babel, like the Verses series, the Verses, and I have kind of my format, and action's only worth 1 point, Bancroft is not getting that point against anyone, and he'll have a chance And he's not like a freebie for any other section. Speaking of which, prose. Bancroft's prose is like very good. It's especially, I actually thought his prose was the best in The Hod King. I thought Fall of Babel, there were just a few examples where it sacrificed clarity a little bit. Like there'd be some metaphors there that I had to read a couple times to try and see what they were saying. Sometimes this was just because of the environment. Like at one point he describes something as like emerald grass, which works. Like normally you would just assume that means grass that's like so green it looks like emerald, like super healthy, lush grass, which is what it meant. The problem is, in the setting that we were on, it easily could literally mean emeralds placed everywhere to look like grass. And I actually was not sure what it meant at first. But other than that, it's extremely unique. I think he probably has one of the most identifiable styles in the genre, and 90-something% of the time, it doesn't sacrifice clarity either. Like, it's very smooth to read, and it's very clear. I think maybe the only place like it that could separate it from like my actual like literally top tier prose writers is like the word choice for writing like human emotions for emotional moments. These weren't as emotional reads for me as some other books are, but I know for lots of people they were. So that just might be the way that I connected to the characters. I tended to find the books very compelling, but not super emotional. And also, it's very low magic. It has the surreal feel that makes it seem magical, but I actually, in all honesty, do not know if a single thing in these books is actually, like, expressly supernatural. Like, it actually might have no magic. I'm not sure. I'm probably wrong about that, and I'm forgetting things. Ooh, I think I am forgetting that. Okay, there's maybe some things that are supernatural in here, but it's very low magic, while also feeling like a very magical setting because of how kinda bombastic the settings in the tower are. And very quickly, I would like to talk about, in a spoiler-free way, about Fall of Babel. Because for those who have been somewhat closely following, might know Fall of Babel is one of the most divisive final books in a series that I know of. Probably since, like, The Dark Tower. And I'm just spoiler-free. I don't really get why it's as divisive as it is. Like, there are definitely some very bold decisions with the ending that I know some people really hated. I thought it was just really cool. I basically have two cons for Fall of Babel that I don't have for the other books, but other than that, I think it's basically on the same level. I guess other than, like, the prose thing, but that's barely a con. I barely noticed that. But the first is, it's the book in this series that has the most action by a somewhat considerable margin, which I've already talked about, and also the antagonist, both the main one and kind of the main one's sidekicks, which I think are meant to be scary. They are aggressively forgettable. I think the book kind of does better, the series does better, when it feels like the tower is the antagonist. I think that's actually when it's at its best. But other than that, like, it still had all the pros, which, speaking of which, now I'm going to talk about like, the good things. Although I do want to mention, because I like mentioning this for every review, so you know, not a grimdark series at all. Especially with who the protagonist is, Thomas Senlin. Very much the opposite of a grimdark protagonist. Really someone who's really trying very hard to be a good person, and people tend to act, and he actually cares about things like that. Which, it's one of those series where it's like, I joke sometimes that if you take any popular series, someone out there thinks it's grimdark, and someone out there thinks it's YA. This is really one of those series where I can't imagine how anyone would think it was grimdark, or how anyone could think it YA. It is firmly not grimdark adult fantasy, which tends to be a good thing in my book. So what does it do as well? Well, it's a pretty well-rounded series. If I gave report cards for book series, and, you know, I gave marks for characters, prose, setting, plot, theme, and action, it would get almost straight B's. The only thing it wouldn't get at least a B in would be action, and then I'd probably give it an A for prose, and then like a B for everything else. I think it's extraordinarily solid. It did not blow me away. Like, at no point. Sometimes I'm reading a book, and I'll read something, and it literally makes me say out loud, like, holy crap, this is so good. And it just makes me want to, like, devour it or talk about it, and it didn't ever blow me away to that degree. But, like, everything was so solid. The characters all see the world in a distinct way. They're all dynamic while not being unrealistic. Like, they don't have the arcs of what I find to be very shallow arcs of they have flaws and their character development is overcoming those flaws. Which, whatever, it can be done well, but it's pretty hard to do it. That is not what they are. They're dynamic in a very realistic way where they are both growing as people, but also being impacted in negative ways by the things around them, experiences, and the setting they are in, which tends to be a leech on the social fabric and goodness of people. The plot, I think the plot is really solid. It's very methodical. He doesn't... I don't think Bancroft ever had to get characters to act against their nature to get them where he wanted to be for the plot. It was very much a plot where it's like, basically it felt like the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones and not the last 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, where all the characters are acting based on who they are and their interests and what they would do. And Bancroft was able to just craft this in a way where it always felt like that, but he got people to go where he wanted them to. And as I mentioned, Prose is excellent. He's like very, very identifiable and unique style. It's very unique to read, and it's just very pleasant to read. And it explores themes in, I think, a very natural way. Like, the themes don't get in the way of the book. It's very much, he has a story to tell, and the themes come from that, not there's a bunch of themes that he wants to drill into you that get in the way of the story. I don't think the themes ever got in the way of the story, and I think the way he used the setting and the tower to explore themes was really well done. And I think this was actually me doing a series review in a relatively reasonable amount of time. But anyway, that's all I got for the Books of Babel. Definitely a series I would recommend. Not a series I would recommend if you want action, or good action, because it doesn't have that. But if you want a unique, not a particularly like huge setting, like the setting isn't Malazan. It isn't like, oh my god, this is so giant in scale. I mean, it's a building. It's a really, really big building. But the setting, I think, the way it influences the characters and it works for the themes and just the way it's very unique and all the different like floors are kind of corrupt in their own way, and yet there's almost like there's a coherent style to the Tower of Babel despite every floor being totally different. And just, well plotted in a way that is, I don't remember any like real plot holes that I noticed. And I tend to notice those. So yeah, really solid series. Would recommend.